This is the story of a woman who commanded 300 warriors, divorced her husband for choosing the wrong side of a war, and was considered so dangerous by English colonists that when she died, they cut off her head and stuck it on a pole. Her name was Weetamoo, and for 350 years, they tried to erase her from history. Most Americans have heard of King Philip's War. It was, per capita, the bloodiest conflict in American history, deadlier than the Civil War, more than 7 times deadlier than World War II. Relative to population, over 1,000 English settlers killed. More than half of every town in New England raided. 12 settlements burned to the ground completely. And on the native side, the devastation was apocalyptic. 3,000 to 4,000 dead, thousands more displaced, captured, or sold into slavery across the Atlantic. Everyone knows King Philip, Metacom, the Wampanoag leader who organized a massive coalition of tribes against the English. His name is in the title of the war. But here's what almost nobody knows. The colonists themselves, in their own private letters, admitted that one leader was just as powerful as Philip, maybe more dangerous, and that leader was a woman. Nathaniel Saltonstall, a Massachusetts colonist, described Weetamoo as potent a prince as any round about her, and had as much corn, land, and men at her command as King Philip himself. A Puritan leader wrote that she was second only to Metacom when it came to the mischief that has been done and the blood that has been shed in this war. Another colonist called her next to Philip in respect of the mischief she hath done, and yet almost no one has heard of her. Weetamoo was born around 1635 in the Mattapoisett village along the Taunton River. Her father was Corbitant, the Sachem of the Pocasset, a nation within the larger Wampanoag Confederacy. Corbitant stood apart from other leaders of his time. While many sachems worked to build diplomatic relationships, with the English colonists flooding into their territory, Corbitant flatly rejected them. He believed the land belonged to Native Americans and that the colonists needed to leave. Full stop. Right before Weetamoo was born, something happened that doesn't get taught in schools. Between 1616 and 1619, a mystery disease tore through coastal New England. Survivors and colonists described the same horrifying symptoms: skin turning yellow, violent nosebleeds that wouldn't stop, fever that didn't break. Nobody at the time knew what it was. Modern researchers now think it may have been leptospirosis, a bacteria carried by rats that had stowed away on European trading ships. In other words, the epidemic that gutted Weetamoo's world may have arrived not on a person, but on a rat hiding in a cargo hold. The devastation wasn't quiet. English scouts who explored the area a few years later described walking past village after village, where the only thing left standing was bones, piles of skulls still lying where people had fallen. One colonist wrote that the land had been left, quote, utterly void. In 1618, at the height of the dying, a comet appeared in the sky over New England. Wampanoag medicine men took one look at it and said the sickness was about to get worse. They were right, 90%. Some estimates say higher. Of a population that may have numbered 12,000 people in this region alone, only a fraction remained by the time Weetamoo was old enough to understand what had happened to her world. And here's the part that connects directly to her story. This epidemic barely touched one nearby nation, the Narragansett, protected by their location on the bay, which meant that when Weetamoo's father-in-law, Massasoit, sat down with the Pilgrims and signed a peace deal, historians now think it wasn't really about the English at all. It was about survival math. His people were devastated. The Narragansett weren't. He needed an ally against the neighbors who could now crush him. That's the political world Weetamoo was born into, not just colonization. A power vacuum created by a disease nobody understood that reshaped every alliance around her before she ever took command of a single warrior. Imagine 9 out of every 10 people you know just gone. That's the world she inherited. Weetamoo had no brothers, only a younger sister named Wutonekanuske. Because she was destined to become Sachem, her upbringing was unlike that of most girls in her tribe. At 14 years old, she was sent alone into the woods to undergo a vision quest, a rite of passage traditionally reserved for males. She fasted in isolation until, as the tradition describes it, her child's soul was killed. She emerged as something new. She became a skilled hunter, swimmer, and fisherman, and she also mastered the duties traditionally associated with women: smoking fish, cooking, preparing animal hides for clothing. That distinction matters. Weetamoo occupied a space that defied the rigid gender categories English colonists understood. She performed the roles of both men and women. In Algonquian culture, She held the title of Sunksqua, a female sachem, a paramount chief chosen by the people. Her name, Weetamoo, translates to speak to them, and that's exactly what she did. Weetamoo's personal life reads like a political thriller. She married 5 times, and nearly every marriage was a strategic alliance. Let's slow down on those 5 marriages, because each one was a calculated move, not a romance. Husband number 1, Winnipurkit, Sachem of Saugus, a marriage that linked Pocasset to another Wampanoag territory. He died almost immediately. Alliance over before it started. Husband number 2, Wamsuta, also known as Alexander, was the eldest son of Massasoit, the grand sachem of the entire Wampanoag Confederacy. Yes, that Massasoit, the one who sat down with the Pilgrims at what Americans call the First Thanksgiving. His son married Weetamoo, and through that union, she became connected to the most powerful family in the Wampanoag world. This is the marriage that mattered most. But even with her own husband, Weetamoo held her ground. In 1662, Wamsuta tried to sell Pocasset land to a Rhode Island colonist named Peter Talman, Weetamoo's land. She took the case before the General Court of Plymouth and argued that Wamsuta was selling Pocasset land unlawfully. Think about that. A native woman in 1662 challenging her own husband in a colonial court over land rights. And then things got dark. That same year, the English accused Wamsuta of independently negotiating land sales and marched him to Plymouth at gunpoint. While in their custody, he fell suddenly ill and died. Weetamoo and Wamsuta's brother Metacom believed he had been poisoned. From that point forward, Weetamoo's distrust of the colonists hardened into something permanent. She had inherited her father's skepticism, and now she had a reason to make it personal. After Wamsuta's death, Weetamoo married twice more. Her third husband, Kekwaquanashet, barely surfaces in the historical record. And notice that gap because it tells you something too. Not every part of her life was preserved, only the parts that threatened someone. Husband number 4, Petonovit, is where it gets interesting. When King Philip's War broke out in June 1675, Petonovit chose to side with the English. Weetamoo didn't beg him to reconsider. She didn't negotiate. She divorced him. And she didn't just pick a side in the war. She split her own tribe. Members of the Pocasset ended up fighting on both sides of the conflict against each other. And husband number 5, Quinnipin, wasn't chosen at random either. His father and grandfather were major Narragansett leaders, the very nation the epidemic had spared decades earlier, the nation that was now the strongest military force left standing in the region. By marrying Quinnipin, Weetamoo wasn't falling in love. She was rebuilding her coalition from the wreckage of a 50-year-old power vacuum, tying her diminished Pocasset forces to the one native nation in New England that still had the numbers to fight. Every single marriage was a move on a board only she seemed to fully understand. Meanwhile, Weetamoo's younger sister Wootnekanuske had married Metacom, King Philip. So this war wasn't just political for Weetamoo. It was family. Here's the part that almost changed everything. Before the war fully erupted, Weetamoo was actually considering siding with the English. The deputy governor of Rhode Island, John Easton, was in discussions with her about forming an alliance. She had serious reservations about Philip's war. She knew what it would cost. But before those talks could go anywhere, a group of English soldiers attacked a fleet of canoes in June 1675. They thought the canoes belonged to Metacom. They didn't. The canoes were Weetamoo's. That single act of reckless violence pushed her permanently into Philip's camp, and the English lost any chance of having one of the most powerful native leaders on their side. Weetamoo traveled to Narragansett territory to build a broader coalition, and during that visit, she married her 5th and final husband, Quinnipin, whose father and grandfather were both powerful Narragansett leaders. Together, they had at least one child. Mary Rowlandson, who was later held captive by Weetamoo, described Quinnipin as a handsome warrior. But make no mistake, Quinnipin wasn't the one in charge. Weetamoo was. Then came December 1675. The English launched what became known as the Great Swamp Fight, a preemptive attack on a Narragansett fort. Colonial forces set fire to the compound and slaughtered Narragansett people as they fled. That massacre drove the surviving Narragansetts fully into the war and directly triggered one of the most famous events of the entire conflict. February 10th, 1676. The Lancaster Raid. Weetamoo and Quinnipin led a combined force of Narragansett, Nipmuc, and Wampanoag warriors against the English settlement of Lancaster, Massachusetts. Weetamoo commanded more than 300 warriors. 300. Under her direct command, they killed many of the colonists and took captives, including a woman named Mary Rowlandson. And this is where history gets ironic. Rawlinson became Weetamoo's servant. For 11 weeks, this English Puritan woman lived in close proximity to one of the most powerful native leaders of the war, and she wrote about it. In 1682, Rawlinson published a narrative of her captivity. That became an instant bestseller, still considered one of the most important captivity narratives in American literature. But here's what Rawlinson got wrong. And it matters. Because of her own Puritan beliefs about gender, Rawlinson couldn't recognize Weetamoo's political authority. She described Weetamoo as merely one of Quinnipine's 3 wives, a woman with no power of her own. She completely missed that Weetamoo was the one running things. What Rawlinson did capture, almost despite herself, was Weetamoo's presence. She wrote, "A severe and proud dame was she, bestowing every day in dressing herself near as much time as any of the gentry of the land, powdering her hair and painting her face, going with her necklaces, was with jewels in her ears and bracelets upon her hands." Rawlinson meant that as an insult. She saw vanity, but what she was actually witnessing was power. In Algonquian culture, only women of rank were permitted to produce girdles of wampum and beads. Wampum wasn't decoration. Under Algonquian law, wampum was wealth and authority. Weetamoo's elaborate appearance wasn't vanity at all. It was a deliberate display of her rank. Every necklace, every bracelet, every bead was a political statement. Rawlinson was eventually ransomed back to the English on May 2nd, 1676, for goods worth 20 pounds. By spring of that year, the tide of the war was turning against the native coalition. Weetamoo's forces, which had numbered 300 at the start of the conflict, were being ground down by disease, starvation, and relentless colonial attacks. The English strategy of total war, destroying food supplies and driving native forces into constant retreat, was working. On August 6th, 1676, Weetamoo and her remaining band were ambushed near the Taunton River. She attempted to escape on a makeshift raft of broken wood. One Need account describes it this way: "She made one desperate effort to escape, knowing, as she did, that the tender mercies of Christian whites, as exercised upon red heathen, are cruel. She took to the water and was seen no more, until her corpse, entirely naked, drifted ashore." What happened next tells you everything you need to know about colonial attitudes toward her. The English seized her body, cut off her head, carried it to Taunton, and mounted it on a pole. When native prisoners saw it, they broke into what witnesses described as woeful and heart-rending lamentation. There's a bitter irony that even the colonists noticed. Increase Mather, the Puritan minister, pointed out that Weetamoo drowned in the same Taunton River, where she had helped Metacom and his warriors escape early in the war. The river that had once been her tool of resistance became the site of her death. 6 days later, on August 12th, Metacom was hunted down and killed. His body was drawn and quartered, beheaded, and his hands chopped off. The quarters of his body were hung from trees. His head was displayed on a pike outside Plymouth Colony for 25 years. His hands were preserved in rum, and one was given to the man who betrayed him as a reward. Weetamoo's warriors, who had numbered 300 at the start of the war, had been reduced to 26 by the end. And then came the erasure. This is the part that should make you angry. Increase Mather, the same man who privately described Weetamoo as a military threat equal to Metacom, deliberately minimized her role in his published writings. He kept the truth for his letters to London, but fed the public a sanitized version where she barely mattered. Rawlinson's best-selling narrative portrayed her as just a chief's wife. A painting titled Weetamoo Swimming the Mattapoisett depicted her naked, terrified, drowning, stripped of all the dignity and authority she had carried in life. For over 3 centuries, that was the version of Weetamoo that survived. A footnote, a minor character in someone else's story. It took until 2018 for a scholar to truly set the record straight. Lisa Brooks, a professor at Amherst College and a member of the Abenaki Nation, published Our Beloved Kin, A New History of King Philip's War. The book centers Weetamoo as a major figure in the conflict, not a sidebar. As Brooks writes, an influential Wampanoag diplomat, Weetamoo presented a political challenge to the Puritan men who confronted her authority. Her strategic adaptation to the colonial deed game enabled her to protect more land than any surrounding leader. The book won the 2019 Bancroft Prize, one of the most prestigious awards in American history writing. The Wall Street Journal said Brooks really does give us a new history of King Philip's War by making what seemed like a small story very large indeed. Today, parks and trails carry Weetamoo's name across Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. Weetamoo Falls, Mount Weetamoo, Woods. There's even a trail called 6 Husbands, a reference to her marriages, though she actually had 5, and the Wampanoag people never forgot her. Within the Wampanoag community, she has always been a beloved figure. Known as a Sunksqua, a rock woman. The Wampanoag Nation endures. The Mashpee Wampanoag were re-acknowledged as a federally recognized tribe in 2007, after a process that took more than 30 years. In 2015, the federal government declared 320 acres in Mashpee and Taunton as the tribe's initial reservation. As recently as May 2026, the Herring Pond Wampanoag tribe received formal state recognition in Massachusetts, honored in a ceremony at Plymouth Town Hall in Plymouth, where it all started. Weetamoo commanded 300 warriors. She divorced a husband who chose the wrong side. Her own enemies described her as equal to the most feared native leader in New England. She resisted colonial expansion with everything she had, and when capture became inevitable, she chose the river over surrender. They cut off her head and put it on a pole because they were afraid of her. Then they spent 3.5 centuries trying to pretend she didn't matter. She mattered.